Destination people always seem to find the magic and the mystery in this beautiful world. Don't get left behind.
Welcome everybody, I'm Tom Anderson and this is Webinar on Wednesday with Destinations Together. As always, a warm welcome to our Zoom listeners and cruise line executives that are tuning in. Today is our first webinar of the 2021 season. It is also the first session of our 2021 Sustainable Tourism webinar series sponsored by Destinations Together and the Global Sustainability Tourism Council, GSTC. As we pass into the new year, the leadership in Washington, D.C. has changed and the vaccine rollout continues to accelerate. As the vaccines are distributed, it's good news for all of us and brings us closer to resuming a more normal lifestyle, which could include traveling once again and even taking a cruise. Imagine in 2019, travel and tourism contributed 10% of the world's GDP. Of course, due to the pandemic, it is now significantly less. Before I continue with the introduction, we would like to ask each of you to complete a very brief poll to get an idea of your individual sustainability situation. So Larry, if you could please pop up the poll and then I'll go ahead and continue. Thanks. The topic of sustainable tourism has remarkable depth and breadth and is far-reaching. During this session, the panel of experts will attempt to break it all down. Of course, one of the main reasons we travel is to experience the destinations with their historic and cultural sites, natural resources, pristine oceans with reefs teeming with life. All this offers up experiences that lift our hearts, elevate our thinking, and rejuvenate us. But how do we protect these resources and the local people from what some might term hit and run tourism? This webinar today focuses on sustainable tourism, the big picture. How do we define sustainable tourism? How do countries and destinations manage these valuable resources that bring the engine of travel and tourism, that drive the engine of travel and tourism? Should a country establish a national tourism policy enshrined by law, or simply have well-intended guidelines or voluntary standards? Should it be taxed to generate revenue to enforce the guidelines and maintain the venues? What role can large corporations play to make a difference? The bottom line, there must be leadership at the national level. There must be strong leadership at every level, including corporations and stakeholders. Large tourism-related companies can make a major impact by embedding policies that support sustainability, such as Royal Caribbean's commitment to source only sustainable MSC or ASC fish products. These initiatives really move the needle. Additionally, CLIA has partnered with GSTC to help port cities analyze how to manage tourism flows and develop a sensible roadmap for a sustainable future. Specifically, CLIA and GSTC recently announced a sustainability assessment of Herculine in Corfu. This assessment will focus on four main categories of destination sustainability: destination management and governance, economic benefits to local communities, protection of cultural heritage, community and visitor well-being, and environmental protection and conservation. With GSTC's support and guidance on sustainability standards, stakeholders can develop strategies to implement new policies and devise a way to measure and compare results. Through this collaborative and methodical approach, real progress can be made. Larry and I really wanted to sponsor this webinar series as we feel strongly about the issue of responsible and sustainable tourism. It is a way to help fill the knowledge gap on the topic. Rising incomes have enabled more people to travel, which generates economic activity, but that comes with an environmental cost. We fear that once people feel comfortable enough to travel in a post-COVID world, it is likely that travel and tour companies will be so eager to get the business that some local, natural, historic, and cultural sites may be negatively impacted by throngs of enthusiastic tourists. With this in mind, we are trying to help keep cruise-related tour companies keep their sustainability on the agenda and in their budget. Frankly, responsible tourism can be a driver for preservation of both natural resources and cultural sites, as well as a vehicle for sustainability. To achieve this, sustainable and responsible tourism development requires clear and measurable standards as provided by GSTC, cooperative commitment, and coordination between site management and all relevant public and private sectors. Bottom line, through our collaborative efforts, we can achieve a win-win-win situation. There's a lot to unpack during this session on sustainable tourism. I'll turn this over to Larry to share some important information and then introduce our guest speakers for today's Destinations Together webinar on Wednesday. Larry?
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. Everybody, I will leave the poll up, so if you haven't had an opportunity to go ahead and fill it out, please feel free to do so. Want to thank you all for joining us today. Wow, what a year we all went through. Tom and I are looking forward to starting out this year with coverage of diverse topics that are a strong interest to everyone. Before we begin, let me remind you of a few important housekeeping items. We are recording this webinar and we'll upload it in our website in the next few days. There's a Q&A tab below on your screens. We look forward to getting your questions passed on to the panelists. We encourage you all to vote on questions listed in the Q&A to ensure we include the most relevant ones. Please remember, we and our guests are only providing our opinions and possible sources for further intel. Today marks the first of 4 in a series showcasing sustainable tourism with the Global Sustainable Tourism Council, GSTC. Please refer to our website for further detail on the up and coming webinar series. And of course, we'll be sending out email reminders as well as social media posts. Today's webinar is about sustainable tourism and the cruise industry. And I'm happy to report that we have gotten individuals registered for today's webinar from around the globe, which is so encouraging. Tom and I want to extend a big thank you to those joining us for the first time today. We really appreciate it. Randy, please join me as I provide a quick introduction. We're honored to have Randy Durband, CEO of Global Sustainable Tourism Council, GSTC, who will provide an overview of sustainable tourism and discuss the impact of the pandemic, as well as the vision for the future. When Randy will moderate a panel featuring Rob Zeiger, Global Chief Communications Officer, Royal Caribbean Group, and Ukko Metsola, Director General, Cruise Line International Association, CLIA, Europe. Randy, it's great to have you here with us today, along with Rob and Ukko, which you will formally introduce shortly after your opening. With that, I will turn the webinar over to you. Thank you.
Very good. Well, very nice to be with all of you. Let me pull up a PowerPoint deck here. So yeah, the topic is sustainable tourism, and I've been asked to talk and frame up this huge topic of sustainable tourism. And I'm going to do that by talking about what sustainable tourism is. At the same time, I talk about who we are at GSTC. So let me just get into it in the interest of time. Very nice to be with all of you. It's lovely to see so many people. So on this slide, I asked the question, who is GSTC? Well, who is GSTC is related to the question of what is sustainable tourism. In the year 2005, UNEP and UNWTO, 2 UN agencies, UN Environmental Program and UNWTO, the World Tourism Organization, got together and they did some work together to define sustainable tourism and to do some work on it. One of the things they did is give us this 1-sentence definition that I think holds up today, and it's widely used as I think the best single sentence definition of sustainable tourism, and that is tourism that takes into account the current and the future impacts. And those impacts are not just environmental, but they're in economic, social, and look at needs of the visitor. And it also talks about host communities. So it defines sustainability very broadly. Currently, the UN has this program called the One Planet. We're part of that because we're not in the United Nations system. We're a separate nonprofit NGO, but we were created by these UN agencies, legally registered actually in the United States because the UN Foundation in Washington, D.C. gave us a secretariat and an office for our first 5 years back in 2007. Many industry players have been engaged with us. Founding members included Sabre, but many businesses, other NGOs like Rainforest Alliance, we consider founding member, WWF, Conservation International. Many people were at the table to form us. Something also that's of relevance in terms of who we are, and because in our discussions today and 2 weeks from now, we're going to be looking a great deal at tour operators, and especially land tour operators at cruise destinations. In the year 2000, UNEP formed this group called the Tour Operator Initiative, and they analyzed the complexity of supply chains of tour operators. And they set some guidelines in motion for sustainable tour operator supply chains and contracting. That was 21 years ago. That work holds up today. There's some guidelines and guidance that they put together in those days that stands up today. In 2015, we acquired or merged together with the Tour Operators Initiative. So the point here is that the essence of who we are goes back to UN Environmental Program in the year 2000 and UNWTO and UNEP coming together in 2005. So the work we do is based on sort of a global UN perspective, and we were created as a nonprofit to be the keepers of standards. And the GSTC Criteria is the name we give to our global standards for sustainable tourism. It's been mentioned that they're based on these 4 pillars: sustainable management, social and economic benefits, cultural heritage issues, and environment. And look at the language of sections B, C, and D. Maximize the benefits of tourism and minimize the negative impacts. So much of what we do and talk about is all about, let's take the good from tourism, the economic benefits, the jobs, the human connection. There's so many fabulous things about tourism. Let's maximize those positives and let's minimize the negative byproducts and negative impacts. So do more good and do less harm is part of the mantra. So we were established in 2007, and then a year later, in 2008, we released our first set of standards, the GSTC Criteria. At that time, they were called the GSTC Criteria for hotels and tour operators. We've revised them 2 times, renamed them. We look at that set of standards, the GSTC Industry Criteria, as guiding principles for any type of organization that's engaged in tourism. But we have them put together in tremendous detail with performance indicators for 3 areas: hotels, tour operators, and destinations. And with that, we provide guidance for the certification of those 3 areas: hotels, tour operators, and destinations, and then rename them the GSTC Industry Criteria. Now, it's very important to note that these standards are not, in a sense, ours. They were not created by a committee. We are the keepers of an incredible process of inclusion. We send out literally thousands of calls around the world for people to comment. And anybody on this call, anybody who wants to in the world can comment when we revise the criteria. So these are the world standards. We're the managers of a process. Secondly, in 2013, we released the destination criteria, and they provide 2 levels of guidance to the public sector. One is a matter of policy for policymakers at the national level, provincial and state level, municipal level, and as a guidebook, as guidance for good destination management at the destination level. So policy and actual practice. Now it's interesting, I was asked to say a word about the public sector engagement in sustainable tourism. Traditionally, government has not been very good at planning for tourism. And I would argue that's because society does not understand how complex travel and tourism is. Those of you on this call probably understand the complexity. You're engaged in it. You know that we have very complex supply chains. You know that we have very complex visitor experiences, where it's an experience and service-based industry. And it's not easy. It's not easy making the customers pleased, and it's not easy getting the contracts to operate your business. Very, very complex. Yet government hardly puts any planning and development. That's really been changing in the past 10 years. I think the over-tourism discussions, largely in Europe, just in the past 5 years, really got the attention of governments around the world. Other factors did. Changes in technology and just changes in the massive growth of demand in tourism with the opening up of Asian markets and after the end of communism and just growth of middle class all over the world. And one final comment I want to make about the public sector is that as part of that 10-year movement towards more planning and development, and not just thinking of themselves as the promoters of travel, but actually that they need to take a more hands-on approach to the development and planning. During the pandemic, we've actually seen more engagement around the world by government, whereas businesses unfortunately have had to furlough people and lay people off. Many of them, like Royal Caribbean on this call today, keeping some good people in place, keeping sustainability front and center. But not all businesses of all size are able to do that. But government, with their civil servants still in place, many of them, I'm happy to report, have used the pause in business to really focus on sustainability. And I see that we're going to come out of the pandemic with many governments with more and better policies. We know that because we're working with about 12 or 15 national governments right now, and countless municipalities and provincial governments and so forth. And so that's good news. I also put on the screen this organization called the ISEAL Alliance. They have a standard setting code that sets guidance, a code for guidance on how to create standards for sustainability in all sectors. And we do our best to adhere to those codes. I'll talk more about them. Just to give you a sense and the flavor of who's engaged with us, this is a very small partial list of our global network of members in the public sector and private sector. You'll see some big names like Hilton and Royal Caribbean and Booking.com and states and national governments and so forth. And this is just a sample, just to give you a flavor. Some very big players in travel and tourism are engaged with us. We're not well known. We don't even make an attempt to get to be known by consumers. We're working with government and business on making their frameworks better by applying the GSTC criteria. And we have a number of programs that you can learn about by going to our website. We just don't have time, to cover those things today. But I do want to express this point. This slide, this screen is very busy, and I don't expect you to study this and understand it carefully, but it's important for you to understand this point. And this really relates to some of the discussion that Rob is going to have about what Royal Caribbean is doing with us. And that is, we're really part of a hierarchy that's really the strongest in the world to provide some level of assurance of claims of a business. So at the bottom of the screen, you see certification bodies. Those certification bodies that have come to us in our relatively new program, we only launched this about 5 years ago. So the number of certification bodies today is small, but there's a big pipeline. Many are in process and many are looking at this, and this list will grow substantially in the coming months and years. These certification bodies voluntarily come to us and have us look under the microscope. The way they would certify your business, we accredit them. And we partner with this organization called Assurance of Services International that performs the accreditation for us based on our standard. And we follow relevant ISO standards and the assurance code of the ISEAL Alliance. The point here is not for you to memorize this, but the point here is for you to understand that we have built a system that's the most credible and scientific really in the world. Let me step away from travel for a moment and make this point. In other sectors, eco-labeling started as purely a B2B play and eventually got some consumer attention. When Kimberly-Clark went in a big way years ago by getting FSC, Forest Stewardship Council, eco-labeling on their toilet tissue and other paper products, that eventually can trickle all its way to the consumer on the retail level. But when they were our age, they started in 1993, they were doing what we're doing, and that was just talk to producers, in this case, tour operators and hotels, to get them certified, to verify to the world that their operation is certified sustainable. That makes possible for a Kimberly-Clark to communicate to all of their stakeholders that they're producing sustainable paper because it's got an outside vendor or outside player verifying that. Here in travel and tourism, we're starting to see movement along these lines, where Iberostar Hotels now is giving preferential food procurement for fish and seafood that's eco-labeled by MSC and ASC. The TUI Group, one of the largest travel companies in the world, they've worked for the past several years getting their owned and operated hotels certified to the GSTC. They're now going to take that to a new step where the hotels that they contract with throughout the world, there are 150 brands, enormous purchasing power of this huge network of their various brands and their joint ventures. And they're going to start next year, in the coming year, actually, more strongly enforcing and contracting hotels to be certified. We're going to hear from Rob here in a moment talking about Royal Caribbean's program. I'm just going to touch upon this element that WWF has pushed for these sorts of things in all sectors, and they work very closely with us. And so when Royal Caribbean engaged with WWF, one of the targets was setting targets for land tours on the shore excursions to be sustainably certified. The point here that Rob will talk about is that this is completely in line with what's been successful in other sectors and is the most credible, most systematic scheme to verify that your business is operating as sustainably as you can and your suppliers are. Now, in September 2019, Seatrade and CLIA, before Seatrade, CLIA invited me to come and speak at their Ports and Destinations Day in Hamburg. Some of you may have been there. And we talked about the Royal Caribbean program. I was on stage all morning with Adam Goldstein and Kelly Craighead of CLIA. And MSC Cruises signed up, and other cruise lines have been talking about it. The pandemic has set this back, but many cruise lines are looking at this. So what Royal has done, just as they had hoped, they've inspired their competitors. Because if this can be done collectively as an industry, I think it certainly elevates the credibility of the industry in terms of its sustainability efforts. So the key to these kinds of movements, of setting these kinds of targets, are to set them out in the distance, give people time. You need a few years for business and your supply chain to get certified as sustainable. But make the various targets, whether it's certification or just improvement, attainable but challenging, because targets work. If we have purpose, if we have goals, if we have targets, we have an endpoint, a true target to work towards, we can motivate our staff, we can motivate our whole team to move forward. So that's very quickly, very complex set of issues to kind of frame this up. And then 2 weeks from now, the focus will be about the tour operators and the detail of the certification process. Then the following session, we'll talk about destination stewardship, what we're doing, and Ukko with CLIA will be talking about that to some extent. And then we'll talk about that in detail 4 weeks from now, and then I'll come back 6 weeks from now, we'll talk about hotel certification. So Tom, Larry, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and I'd like to introduce Rob Zeiger of Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines, and he's been very involved in the work that that Royal Caribbean has done with us. And so I'm going to stop talking and let Rob tell us what Royal Caribbean has been up to on sustainability generally, and with us at GSTC and where they're going with it. So thank you very much, and Rob, over to you.
Thank you, Randy. Good seeing you again. Good morning, everybody. On behalf of all of my colleagues in Miami and around the world with Royal Caribbean Group, it is good to be in touch with you all. We miss you. It has been an amazing year, an amazingly difficult year for everybody, and I hope that everyone's hanging in there and trusting that we are getting to the point where things are going to start coming back by the end of the year and early next year. But we know it's been a rough one for everybody. We feel it right along with you, and we're glad you're still in this, working together with us. Our journey with GSTC has been a fascinating one, and what I want to talk about is a little bit of what drove us in this direction and why it has made business sense for us, and why we think it's becoming more and more a sensible decision for other businesses as well. We first started talking with World Wildlife Fund 7 years ago, when we were looking at a change in direction for our charitable focus on our ships. And at that time, we thought of it in terms of charity, of just giving money and donating and helping a cause. We did a survey of our guests, both current and past guests. We surveyed our crew members, and we surveyed our employees on land, and had our eyes opened when we asked a question on our survey that said, what is the one cause that a cruise line should support? And each of those audiences came back and 65%, 63%, 64% of those groups each said you should support ocean conservation. And as one of the comments said, if Royal Caribbean can't support the oceans, who can, right? It was an amazing statistic, not least because no other cause that finished second got more than 10%. So it was quite clear the world thought, you guys pay attention to this. That led us to meeting World Wildlife Fund, and we began a process of learning together with them where they explained that what they didn't need was charity. What they needed is for our company to operate differently, for our company to embrace at the deepest level throughout the organization and at the very top that sustainability was an issue that had to be part of our business plan if we were going to fulfill our role as a responsible company. That led to the signing of a 5-year agreement. We are in year 5, starting into year 6 right now. We'll be figuring out our next set of goals shortly. And through those 5 years, it has been an experience that has taught us a ton, helped us become a better company, and I think meaningfully here, enabled us to use our size and scope and scale to help others, particularly tour operators, start this journey themselves. Our goals with WWF some were quite obvious, mostly about greenhouse gas emissions. You saw the information about the sustainable sourcing of seafood. That's great. And we also engage in programs that help to educate our guests. But when we started, the most unusual project we embarked on, and I think the one that at Royal we understood the least, was this goal of having more sustainable tours. And WWF had a good relationship with GSTC. We have our own historical connections to GSTC, but we were reminded of them when WWF brought us back to the table with Randy and his team. And this was an example of being a big company that could help set a standard that would enable other companies to become sustainable as well. And it was a hard one to get our heads around. At first, our guys thought maybe we could get to 500 tours in 5 years, but it felt like a heavy lift. And then something clicked with Roberta Jacoby and Tom and her team, where they started to see how this could be done, especially if there were incentives to help tour providers obtain certification. And Roberta said, screw it, we're going for 1,000 tours. We're going to get to 1,000 in 5 years. We are going to prove that we can do this. And WWF was like, you don't have to go crazy with this stuff. 500 sounds good. You don't need to, prove it that you don't want to necessarily shoot past the moon, to use Randy's term. Well, here we are 5 years later, and we blew past the 2,000 certified tour mark, more than a year ahead of schedule. And that is because of a couple of things. First, it's the passion of the GSTC folks, and Randy and his team are excellent evangelists and good handholders and can help people get started on this and get them through in a sensible, measured, meaningful, not too expensive way. Our team at Royal fell in love with it and put a lot of effort into helping arrange meetings. And then we find there's a little viral element that as tour operators come on board and see the value that they get from being sustainably certified, it becomes a story that they want to share with others. So the momentum clearly built till the point where a couple thousand of you are in this. And I think the payoffs will be meaningful. Because what was happening at the same time that we were beginning to understand our company's role in operating sustainably, there were other data streams coming in that were making the same point from different angles. One is that our consumer research showed that environmental decisions were becoming more important to our consumers. Those of you who have kids like I do in college and high school know that younger generations, and certainly that age group goes well up higher than that, but you know that people are aware of climate change, they're aware of the challenges it presents, they're aware of the necessity to protect cultures, and it's becoming a factor in their decision about whether to travel and where to travel and who to travel with. Randy pulled up the other examples. Maybe you're someone who wants to make sure you have FSC paper. Maybe you're someone who does check where your seafood is sourced from. Increasingly, people want to know a little bit more about the vacation they're taking and to have confidence that it's being done responsibly and in a way that looks out for the locals. So there's an incentive for us to offer more of these tours because it's something that our guests find that they gain confidence from. And that makes it easier for them to choose to sail with us. Makes it easier for them to choose to take their tours with you because you have that certification and the verification. Second factor is that because of GSTC's positioning with that UN endorsement, with that alliance with major organizations like World Wildlife Fund, one of the things we learned right away is that there's an alphabet soup of sustainable tour organizations out there. And I am certain that all of them mean well, and I am certain that all of them do well. But when you have too many certifications, it's like having none of them. You don't know what that stamp counts for. And we felt that watching GSTC emerge as the consensus body in this area added a level of confidence that when we went forward, it would be in a meaningful way, and that tour operators who went along with us would be investing their time and money wisely with a reliable partner. Then you have the converging from the other angle, what's happening with governments. And it's quite clear that as the world learns more about how to be sustainable, it's going to impact how they want the tourism industry to operate. And that can be in terms of emissions, that can be in terms of how ports and piers and other developments are designed and constructed. And it can be to address over tourism. But virtually in every area that Randy's team is concerned with, there are governments paying attention as well and looking to get to a consensus on how we do things. And as a large company, it's in our interest to have some of this stuff standardized and to be able to come in with an approach that is reliably going to be meeting the highest standards so that we can get about our work without any unnecessary slowdowns. As we brought GSTC to meet CLIA and things went quite well, CLIA has started to expand its relationship, including something that we've done as part of our WWF partnership, which are destination assessments that we do with GSTC. And that's where they can go into name your destination and work with local stakeholders to develop a consensus about what the priorities are for making tourism more sustainable. And that offers a little bit of benefit to getting everybody on the same page so that whether it's we think we should restore the old fort, we think we should fix the landfill, we think we should change the hiring policies. Big important topics wherever you go, GSTC is able to come in and help set up a list of priorities that then the rest of us can get behind. So going forward, I think the momentum only picks up. I think it becomes almost table stakes for a lot of organizations as consumers become more sophisticated and as governments become more serious and critical on these subjects, that being able to operate sustainably, to work with others who do so, is a major trend that I think is going to be driving all of us in the travel industry for some years to come. And with that, Randy, I'll hand it back to you.
Great, Rob. Thank you so much. Really great. It's been just such a delight working with you and your team. So congratulations. And, I think in addition to what you and WWF talked about from the start is that WWF pointed out that not only can you make direct impacts yourselves, but you can inspire others. And, and so we've seen that already with other cruise lines, but inspire others with when one tour operator gets certified sustainable, we know that certification works and it makes the business more sustainable. And so when they service your client on a Tuesday, the next day on Wednesday, they've altered their business practices such that they're going to be operating more sustainably with all of their clients every day of the week. So congratulations and thank you for kind of pushing that along. Next, we're going to hear from Ukko Metsola with CLIA, Director General for CLIA in Europe, but plays a very important policy role globally for Ukko. So Ukko is going to talk about more of what we're doing on the two work streams of supply chain development and destination stewardship globally, CLIA and GSTC, and whatever else he wants to talk about with CLIA and sustainability. So Ukko, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Randy. Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to speak to all of you about destination sustainability from CLIA Europe's perspective. I will start with environmental issues, focusing primarily on air emissions because local air pollutants, air quality, and carbon emissions are pretty much where the main political and regulatory attention in Europe is at right now. But I will then conclude with a few words about destination stewardship, which brings me even closer to what Randy and Rob were just saying with their excellent remarks. Most of you probably know, or you have heard, that the European Union has pledged to become the first carbon neutral continent by 2050. This is the so-called EU Green Deal, and it will impact all industrial sectors and the European society at large, cruising included. Randy's earlier picture about JFK reminded me that many people are referring to this policy as Europe's putting man on the moon moment. It is truly ambitious. And I don't think that cruising has any other viable option than to fully align itself with the long-term aspiration or vision to pursue net carbon neutral cruising over time. But what does this mean in practice? How can we pursue zero emissions cruising? The short answer is that we need to work towards the development of clean marine fuels. From my perspective, this is the most important innovation that cruising needs over time to become fully sustainable. And sure enough, we are already running onboard tests with cutting-edge technologies, including fuel cells as we speak. So a lot of work is being done for us to be able to take this quantum leap forward, but it will unfortunately take longer than many people would like to believe. Basically, there are many potential alternative clean fuels, carbon neutral biofuels or synthetic fuels that could offer a viable way for sustainable cruise ships over time. The challenge is that as of today, these fuels are not available in sufficient quantities or quality, and they are certainly not available in the right places at the right time for our ships to be able to bunker them in European ports or any ports around this planet. So what is needed here is a massive investment into research and technology and infrastructure, and this will require also a lot of political support and commitment from European Union and its member states. It is basically almost impossible to imagine that any single company or even an industrial sector could absorb all the financial risks associated with the development of these clean fuels. And that is why in Europe we argue that at this point in time, a public intervention is justified in the marketplace. We have a bit of a market failure because of the long-term nature of the challenge and uncertainties in relation to the return of investment. This will need to be a collective massive efforts, but we will get there. The opportunity we have is that EU is underpinning or supporting its Green Deal agenda with massive public investment into these green technologies. So we need to make sure that maritime industry, including cruising, is seen as a viable option where the governments will support and spend some of this recovery fund, which is about 750 billion euros, which is going to be allocated over this year and next year towards decarbonization objectives. So we are not here alone. We just need to find a way to work together with our shipyards and technology providers and the European governments so that one day we will have those clean fuels available in European ports. This is the transformational leap. It's a game changer, and that will basically help us to solve the last remaining real environmental challenge associated with our operations, because we have done so much already in the past to address waste streams and other aspects of environmental sustainability, that only the clean fuels, the fact that we are still using conventional fossil fuels, that is the big thing we need to solve. And that will address both the destination sustainability from the local air pollutant or air quality issues and the carbon footprint associated with cruising. So, of course, we have gone through a massive crisis, but we can also face the positive future. People from all over the world will continue to want to travel, discovering different cultures and places on cruise ships. Many studies show that being able to travel again is the #1 aspiration for pretty much everywhere once this pandemic is over. And more than anything else, we therefore need to focus on finding this pathway towards the clean fuels, because somehow the sustainable transport and sustainable tourism are really two sides of the same coin, because biggest emissions are caused by getting people from A to B. Now, finally, turning back to the destination stewardship, just very quickly. If I look at the coastal communities in Europe, and this applies to coastal communities and remote islands around the world, we have seen during this crisis just how important cruising is to these communities and islands, many of which cannot be reached by any other modes of transportation. And because of the COVID-19, the economic pillar of sustainability is crumbling as the travel and tourism sector faces up to the loss of millions of jobs, leaving these local communities suffering. And full recovery from this crisis is likely to take some time. This bleak reality offers us also an opportunity to reset our collective thinking to ensure harmonic development and economic benefits to the local communities as we recover. I think there are certain well-known European market destinations and hotspots like Venice that will require special attention. But we believe that we are making good progress, for example, with the sustainability assessment that Global Sustainable and Travel and Tourism Council made together with us in the city of Dubrovnik. And that is a good model that we hope to replicate and expand in other places. In Dubrovnik, it was relatively simple. I mean, one of the core steps forward was simply that we found a way between CLIA members to stagger ships' arrivals and departures to the city so that people flows could be managed better. As many of you know very well, over-tourism or anti-tourism used to be a big concern before this crisis hit us. And there are occasionally some relatively simple solutions that will simply allow us to manage people flows better, also using technology. So I'm pleased to tell you that CLIA is expanding this partnership following the leadership of Royal Caribbean Group, which really started this, as Rob was explaining. So just before Christmas, we agreed to co-fund new GSTC assessments in Heraklion and Corfu. And this is a clear indication that our plan is not just to return to the old normality. Our gradual healthy return to service will be combined with a smart focus on stewardship, including digital instruments to effectively measure and manage people flows in cooperation with the ports and destinations that we visit. It is one of our very, very important priorities, because we know that as soon as we return to service, the attention will immediately go back into how do we actually leave sufficient economic footprint and exist in a harmonious way with the ports and destinations that we visit. So we are really grateful for GSTC and all the other players in this space who are helping us to improve ourselves and we look forward to continuing with GSTC and other stakeholders to achieve all of these ambitions. Thank you very much for your attention. Back to you, Randy.
Great, thank you so much, Ukko. I think my part is over. I think we're ready. Tom, are you ready to moderate Q&A?
I'm back. Yeah, we do have a few questions that have come through, and they're popping through more and more. I'm just going to start at the very top of the list. This one comes from Ian. How long is the GSTC qualification process and the estimated cost for joining this program? Is there an annual membership fee, and how is this determined?
The detail on this is the subject of the next webinar in this series 2 weeks from now on February 10th. So you should be able to get many of your questions answered there. It's going to be led by Nout Koosters of a company called Travel Life. Now, GSTC, we do not certify directly. We provide an accreditation service for a global set of certification bodies. Royal Caribbean chose to select Travel Life as the preferred partner just to make it easier. Travel Life is probably the most global organization. They've got more auditors in more places than others because they've been at it longer than others. They're very good at what they do. If they're accredited by us, they're good at what they do. The costs vary by the certification body, but I think we should just withhold this. I'm sorry, for 2 weeks, because now it can really answer all these questions really quite thoroughly about the timeline. Well, and price. I'll say this about timeline. If your business has systematically worked on sustainability for some time and you feel like you're pretty good on the checklist of the full set of the GSTC criteria, you could get certified in a matter of a few months. If you're new to it in terms of breadth and depth, it can take a year. It takes some time to kind of go through the checklist. Nobody does it in weeks. It's months or a year, and again, depending on how far along you are. The pandemic is a fabulous opportunity while you're quiet, because you got some issues to work through to just report and show evidence, and then you may need to change a few business practices here and there. So pandemic is a very good time for an owner manager of an enterprise to work on this.
Randy, that's a really great point, and unfortunately, everything's been kind of at a standstill for almost a year, and utilizing this time to advance the sustainability agenda would be obviously a very good use of time. The next question is specifically a question for Rob. Many companies are hesitant to embark in costly certification processes because they are uncertain there will be enough return on investment. Do you have any insight on how your sustainability efforts have translated into more revenue and/or loyalty from your clients? Rob, you're muted there.
Sorry about that. So the consumer trends have shown an absolute willingness to seek out these types of sustainable certified tours, and so they sell well for us, and that's been one good motivation. The other, Tom, as you well know, is that we're aware of the expense and time that it takes for a person to commit to entering on this. So one of the things we did at Royal was say that if you're willing to go through the certification process, you are now eligible for a longer contract with us, so that you have more time to work off the cost of going through the program. And we, of course, end up with a longer partnership with someone who meets our higher standards now.
Yeah, and at my time at Royal Caribbean, that particular change that I think was probably driven by Roberta and the senior management there, that was really an important piece, because it allowed tour operators to kind of plan over a longer period of time, because as Randy pointed out, it takes time to get the certification, and there is some cost to it as well. So it's
Tom, may I add to it?
Please.
So we don't have as much data as we'd like on this, but we know anecdotally from anybody that's ever been certified globally we always hear them say, you know, we have more cost savings than we expected. And technology has facilitated such that we used to say so many things you need to alter your business might take 2 years to recoup investment, but the technology has improved so much that any capital costs of changing can be recouped very quickly. And then the other side is that in addition to the longer contracts, the Royal Caribbean or getting or keeping the Royal Caribbean contract is it increasingly helps get contracts with others. We're reaching a tipping point. The consumer demand and the business to business procurement demand is growing incrementally as we speak.
And you know, I also think there was a when I was at Royal, and Rob, maybe you can corroborate this, maybe it still is the case, but that there was a lot of research that was indicating that clients that were sailing on Royal Caribbean brand vessels were increasingly making their decisions concerning the environment and sustainability. That was a real key issue for them.
They were, and you know, when you become more familiar with the GSTC playbook, it builds your, at least for me, it built my personal definition of sustainability. And one area that I think is not apparent at first is how GSTC seeks to have to factor in the local community where the tours take place. And they want to make sure that local people are being hired to do some of the work. They want to make sure that local culture and history are highlighted in the tours that are operated, so that you don't end up with just something generic and cookie cutter in different destinations. And that lined up 1,000% with what we heard loud and clear from our guests, particularly in the Caribbean region. You saw us focus our marketing for a period of time on, we were inviting people to come seek the Royal Caribbean and showing that Jamaica was different than Bahamas, was different than Barbados, was different than Haiti, and reminding people that each of these places you went to had its own history and culture and cuisine. And that enabled us to remind people that a Caribbean vacation could be very rich and rewarding in the experiences that you have. It wasn't just going from one identical port to another. And as people make their vacation choices, it's those things that call out the very specific local, cultural, historical, culinary nature that drive a lot of the bookings that we see. And part of the confidence we get out of the GSTC certification is knowing that those factors are accounted for, and so that when our guests get off the ship and join the tour, they're going to get the kind of experience that they were counting on when they decided to take their vacation with us.
Excellent. The next question I have here, Ukko, is from Ann Kailash, and asking you if you could further elaborate on, quote, digital instruments to manage flows, unquote, in the destinations.
Thank you. That's a very good question. I think that COVID-19, among many other things, has forced cruise line members to really think of contact tracing in new ways. And we need to be able to tell where people are, who they have been in contact with. And we have all sorts of, well, different cruise lines have different mechanisms, but bracelets and other things that will allow us differently from before to know where people are. And there are a lot of projects in how to transform those shipboard experiences into the shoreside tours, because in many cases it is just a question of our ability to make sure that we don't suddenly have like 10,000 cruise passengers in the old city of Dubrovnik, because the physical limits of that particular destination can't handle it. So it's a combination of managing through technology and observation, monitor facts and data, when are people coming, when are the peak moments, so that cruise lines can adjust their arrivals and departures, but can hopefully also offer more diverse and alternative land tours and so forth. It's a very good question. I think we will probably have a better answer in a year or two. because of course digitalization is one of those words that is dropped quite lightly, and then how does it actually convert into something that everybody can immediately understand? I think the honest answer is that it is still a little bit of working process, but I am a believer in that technology can help us to solve especially those challenges where there is a genuine physical constraint and a capacity problem, so that we manage the people flows better.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And Ukko, this is an interesting comment from Jamie Sweeting. He says in 2007-8, Royal Caribbean was likely the largest single purchaser of biodiesel in the world for use on their gas turbine ships. This was because the Bush administration put financial incentives in place for both purchasers and end users of biofuels. Demonstration of what Ukko is suggesting could happen at a much bigger scale within the EU. And anyway, he's just commenting on how exciting this is. This I guess you've termed it the Green Deal, the EU Green Deal.
Jane is a great expert in this field and knows the story inside out. I think we have moved far away from the earlier issues and problems that were associated with the use of biofuels that often led into other environmental problems. But we still don't have carbon neutral, clean biofuels available in sufficient quantities. So there is quite a lot of discussion in Europe, for instance, about biomethane. But I don't want to bore the broader global audience in going into the details. I'm very happy to have that discussion offline with Jamie. I also believe that besides the biofuels, there are promising developments in the field of synthetic fuels. So we cannot really use hydrogen fuel because it's not dense enough. We wouldn't have space for our cabins. But we can use clean hydrogen as a building block towards, let's say, synthetic LNG, and voila, that could lead into zero carbon cruising over time. But answers are still escaping us. This will be a journey that will take some decades. But the key point I wanted to stress is that EU at this point in time is thinking about where to invest billions. And I think the cruise industry needs to have a seat at the table so that the maritime industrial ecosystem gets sufficient funding so that we can actually find those long-term solutions.
Right. It's this conversation is fascinating because with this panel of experts, we are covering such a depth and breadth of this field of sustainability, sustainable tourism. We're basically out of time. There are a lot of questions, so we'll endeavor to try to get those answered offline. Many of the questions are specifically about tours. So in our next session, we will be specifically focused on tours, tour certification, what the costs are around that, what the process is around that, et cetera. So we will be covering all that in detail, and now Travel Life is an expert on that. Of course, Randy, with holding the GSTC standard is what it's all pushed up against. Anyway, Larry, I'll bring you back on just very quickly. I just wanted to thank the Randy and Rob and Ukko for just a really great presentations today. Larry?
Yeah, that was very, very well done. Appreciate it in the Q&As. And as Tom said, we'll get the questions out to you guys so that maybe we can get some answers back to those individuals that we weren't able to get to. So again, thank you guys. Our next webinar back at 2 p.m. on Wednesday, February 10th, will be the second session titled Tour Operator Sustainability Path to GSTC Certification with Now Coaster from Travel Life. We look forward to seeing you all. Again, visit us on our website, www.destinationstogether.com, to see all the past and future webinars that we have available. Again, thanks again, Randy, Ukko, and Rob for being here today. We truly appreciate it. And again, to our listeners, and again, many new listeners today, we appreciate you being here. Many thanks for your continued support. Be strong, be safe, and be healthy. Thank you all. Tom?
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks again, Ukko. Thank you, Randy. Thank you, Rob. It's been really wonderful. I think really helpful, and it helps frame up this very, very large topic. We appreciate your support and your expertise. Thank you so much.
Destination together, won't you set me free? take a train, a plane, a big cruise ship, it doesn't really matter to me. Destination